Why the U.S. fell behind China in technology, economy, trade, and development. A deep dive into divergent national strategies for decades. The United States stood as the undisputed global leader in technological innovation, economic prowess, and international influence. Yet, the 21st century has witnessed a dramatic shift, with China emerging as a formidable competitor. Not just challenging, but in many areas, surpassing the U.S. in critical metrics of development, technology, economy, and trade. This profound reversal is not merely a consequence of recent policy missteps, but the culmination of decades of fundamentally divergent national strategies. This article, based on a comprehensive 9-point comparison, argues that while the U.S. prioritized global military intervention and a market-driven domestic model, China meticulously cultivated internal stability, human capital, and economic partnerships through patient, state-directed investment. 1. The foundational pillar, debt-free education versus the burden of cost. One of the most striking differences lies in the approach to education. For decades, China has implemented a policy of providing free education up to the highest levels, master's and PhD, for its most academically gifted students. This state-backed investment in human capital ensures that the brightest minds, regardless of socioeconomic background, are funneled into critical STEM fields, emerging debt-free and ready to contribute to national development. In stark contrast, the U.S. higher education system is largely market-driven, characterized by soaring tuition fees and a colossal student debt crisis. While attracting global talent, this system places immense financial pressure on American families and discourages many domestic students, particularly from low and middle-income backgrounds, from pursuing long, often less lucrative, advanced degrees in science and engineering. This fundamental divergence in educational investment has created a critical gap in the domestic talent pipeline, directly impacting future innovation capacity. 2. The bedrock of stability. State-assured accommodation versus market volatility. Beyond education, China's commitment to social welfare extends to basic living needs. A vast majority, over 90% of Chinese urban households, benefit from state-provided or state-assured satisfactory accommodation. This stems from historical policies that privatized public housing at subsidized rates and ongoing programs for low and middle-income families. The result is significantly lower housing costs and greater security for Chinese citizens. Conversely, the U.S. housing market is defined by high costs, increasing volatility, and a critical shortage of affordable units. Housing is often the largest financial burden for American families, consuming a significant portion of their income and contributing to widespread financial stress. This lack of state-assured housing means that a fundamental need remains a major source of anxiety and debt, diverting family resources and attention away from long-term investment or educational pursuits. 3. The shield against catastrophe. Universal healthcare versus financial risk. The third pillar of China's comprehensive social safety net is its commitment to universal healthcare. With over 95% of the population covered by basic medical insurance and significant state control over costs, the Chinese system acts as a crucial financial shield. While not always covering all expenses, it protects families from the catastrophic medical debt that plagues the U.S. The U.S. healthcare system, in sharp contrast, remains largely market-driven and fragmented. Despite high overall spending, it is a leading cause of personal bankruptcy and financial distress for millions of American families, even those with insurance. The constant threat of crippling medical bills creates pervasive anxiety, hindering long-term financial planning and stability for the vast majority. 4. The engine of progress. Strategic, low-cost infrastructure versus deteriorating assets. China's rapid economic ascent is intrinsically linked to its ambitious and effective infrastructure development. Through swift, decisive, and centralized planning, China has built the world's most extensive high-speed rail network, modern ports, and a comprehensive road system. This strategic and low-cost infrastructure provides immense benefits to students' easy access to education, workers' affordable mobility, and manufacturing industries' efficient supply chains. The U.S., meanwhile, has struggled with decades of underinvestment in its own infrastructure. Its roads, bridges, and public transit systems are often aging and inefficient, creating bottlenecks that increase costs for businesses and commuters. The lack of ubiquitous and affordable public transport forces a greater reliance on expensive private car ownership, further burdening U.S. families and industries. 5. The foundation of trust. High social order and integrity versus societal strain beyond economics. The Chinese model emphasizes high social order, low crime rates, and robust law enforcement, alongside aggressive anti-corruption campaigns. This fosters a sense of public safety and stability, allowing citizens to focus their energy on productivity and advancement without the constant threat of crime, violence, or pervasive drug crises that significantly impact U.S. communities. The U.S., in comparison, grapples with higher rates of violent crime, a devastating opioid epidemic, and ongoing concerns about public safety in many areas. While corruption exists in both systems, the Chinese state's decisive crackdown on malfeasance at all levels is often perceived to foster greater trust and stability, minimizing social disruption and channeling focus towards national goals. 6. The velocity of development, swift, decisive governance versus bureaucratic gridlock. One of the most instrumental factors in China's rapid development is its swift, decisive, and low bureaucracy governance model. The centralized nature of its political system allows for the rapid conception, approval, and execution of massive national projects and policy shifts, often in years rather than decades. This ensures the continuous, unified effort required for long-term strategic planning in areas like education, manufacturing, and infrastructure. The U.S. system, by design, is characterized by checks and balances, multi-party negotiation, and extensive bureaucratic and legal processes. While safeguarding individual liberties, this often leads to legislative gridlock project delays, spanning decades due to environmental assessments, public consultations, and funding battles, and a lack of consistent long-term national policy, making it less fruitful in executing massive development plans. 7. The ultimate benefit: low and competitive cost of living versus high financial stress. The combined effect of China's state-backed policies in housing, healthcare, transportation, and a centrally managed economy results in a significantly lower and more competitive cost of living for its citizens. This directly translates into higher effective disposable income, lower personal financial stress, and greater capacity for families to save or invest in their children's future. In the U.S., the high costs of housing, healthcare, and often transportation contribute to an environment of pervasive financial stress, where a large majority of families live paycheck to paycheck. This fundamental difference in living costs means that the average Chinese family, despite potentially lower nominal wages, enjoys a greater sense of economic security and stability. 8. The opportunity cost: global military engagement versus domestic investment. The divergence in national priorities is starkly evident in resource allocation. The U.S. maintains an enormous military budget, exceeding $900 billion annually, dwarfing that of China and the next several highest-spending nations combined. This vast expenditure, fueled in part by the military-industrial complex and a foreign policy historically engaged in global warfare, regime change, and political interference, represents a profound opportunity cost. These funds are diverted from critical domestic investments in social welfare, education, and infrastructure. China, in contrast, spends a significantly smaller proportion of its GDP on military affairs and has largely avoided costly overseas military entanglements. This strategic choice allows it to channel a much greater share of its national wealth into domestic development, social programs, and economic initiatives that directly benefit its citizens and bolster its industrial base. 9. The future strategy: creating trade markets versus maintaining hegemony. Finally, China's external policy contrasts sharply with that of the U.S. rather than military intervention. China's primary tool for global influence is economic. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), China makes massive investments in infrastructure, natural resources, and agriculture in developing and middle-income countries. This strategy is designed to create future trade markets and foster mutual commerce, securing long-term access to resources and building a network of economically dependent partners. This patient, economic-centric foreign policy builds soft power and long-term trade relationships without the immense financial and human cost of military presence. It ensures future markets for China's vast manufacturing output, while strengthening its supply chains for critical raw materials, a stark contrast to a U.S. foreign policy often criticized for prioritizing military solutions and maintaining a costly global military hegemony. Conclusion: the path forward for the U.S. The confluence of these 9 points paints a comprehensive picture. China's ascent is the product of decades of integrated, state-directed policies that prioritize domestic stability, human capital, and economic development, executed with remarkable consistency and speed. The U.S., meanwhile, has struggled with the internal friction of its democratic process, the societal costs of market-driven essential services, and the immense opportunity cost of a foreign policy heavily reliant on military power. As the U.S. grapples with this new geopolitical reality, the path forward is complex. It would necessitate a radical change in its national strategy, shifting resources away from continuous warfare and foreign intervention towards patient, long-term domestic investment in education, infrastructure, and social welfare, a transformation that would demand unprecedented political goodwill and a sustained, combined effort from the U.S. House, Senate, and President. Such a profound shift, acknowledging that Rome was not built in a day, is estimated to take 20 to 30 years to yield significant results, but is ultimately dependent on the political will of U.S. policymakers to prioritize long-term national fruitfulness over short-term democratic shouting. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel.